Greetings, fellow Toastmasters and guests. It's truly a pleasure to be here with you all today and to be able to speak with you about this topic. And thanks again to Sharon, who gave me a great introduction into this topic today by introducing our club to the Udly tool. That tool, again, is going to be able to assist our club with the preparation and practice needed to deliver an effective and efficient speech. And Sharon's participation in today's meeting inspired me to continue this Better Speaker series as the next module is conveniently focused on preparation and practice. So great timing, right? Figured I'd take the opportunity to follow up on this topic. So the great American inventor, Benjamin Franklin, I think most of us know who that is, has a famous quote in which he states, "By failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail." And as someone who tends to over prepare on my own end, this quote really resonates with me. And we'll expand upon the importance of preparation and practice throughout this discussion today. The majority of speakers recognize the value of careful preparation and regular rehearsal before delivering a speech. But successful speech making consists of more than just devising an idea, writing down notes, or standing up at a lectern or in front of your virtual screen for a specified period of time. The difference between a truly excellent speaker and an average one lies in the amount of preparation and practice that goes into the actual presentation. So through preparation and practice, we have the power as speakers to really craft our own comfort zone and our own security blanket. Speakers need to be ready to deal with these unfamiliar speech settings and to be able to adapt presentations as necessary. One way to be able to help deal with these types of situations is for the speaker to become familiar with the site you're going to speak at or the venue or meeting platform you're going to use. You can dig into this by asking questions or visiting your venue in advance. And again, if you're in a virtual setting, one approach is to understand the meeting platform and where you'll be delivering your speech. Who knows if it's a new platform and you have to download this new piece of software in order to get started, and that may throw off your whole preparation time. So moving forward, some tips to consider when preparing for an in-person speech include becoming familiar with a variety of different tips and tools. One tip is to become familiar with the lectern and the audience location that you'll be speaking to. And I'll talk about the virtual counterpart of that as we get more into this speech. You'll also want to look into the microphone usage, such as the type of microphone, the range of voice, or the range of hearing that come or are associated with that microphone. You'll want to understand the room conditions, including style and lighting. Then you'll also want to understand what visual aids that you're going to want to use, whether a PowerPoint's more effective, handouts will be leveraged, or if you want to leverage a whiteboard, which is more frequent in our work setting, in our sort of professional settings as well. But let's talk more about that. So I mentioned becoming familiar with and understanding the location of the lectern and the audience. And let's talk a little bit more about that. So room arrangements dictate in person the layout for both the speaker and the audience. Where the speaker stands to present and how the audience is seated can really have an impact on how you may want to deliver your speech and how you make sure the entire audience is engaged. It's important to consider, visualize, and ask about a few different things, including the speaking area. So the designated speaking area, which may or may not feature a lectern, you want to understand how that looks. Virtually, it's less of a challenge to understand how the room looks, but you do want to understand where the camera is situated and where the screen is so that the audience can see you. If you're dialing into a meeting and there's a virtual audience that you're speaking to that is all located in one room, which is something I had to do earlier this week, it's important to understand if the audience can hear you, if where you're speaking from is loud enough to actually reach the audience, and if you could hear feedback based upon what the audience is saying. You also, again, want to look at the audience configuration. How are they set up? Is it a U shape around the lectern? If it is, how do you engage the audience? Is it a classroom style where there are rows of seats? That'll also change how you engage the audience as well. You also want to include and think about the stage location of steps or ramps if you're speaking on a platform, right? If you're going up to a stage like in the NIST Red Auditorium, you may want to understand where those stairs are, how to get up there so it doesn't throw you off and sort of get you off of your balance right before you're going to speak. And virtually, you don't really have to deal with that aspect of it. But again, you do want to understand the audience and who you're speaking to internally where you're sitting at, right? You want to understand whether you're in view, whether people can see you clearly, hear you clearly, and different tools and tips like that. So this is more directed to in person from what you're seeing on the slides, but many of these tips can be adapted to virtual presentations as well. You'll also want to become familiar with the microphone that you're going to use. Depending on the size of the room and the number of occupants, a speaker may wish to use a microphone that's provided on site. So you have your standalone microphones that you can carry around in your hand. You have the ones that are tied to your, or you can clip on to your shirts. And then you have ones that are also on the lectern. So depending on if you're presenting in person, you do want to think about those considerations, especially if you're speaking to a group of 100 or more people. It may beg the challenge, or it may lead you to requesting a certain type of mic over another. If the audience is over the age of 50, majority of them, you may want to make sure the volume is a bit louder. If the acoustics of the room are poor, that could also impede the sound as well. So you have to take that into account in terms of what microphone you want to use. And as well, personally, individually, if you're suffering from voice strain, I was presenting with a colleague earlier this week, and unfortunately, he lost his voice. And so he sounded like a frog and nobody could hear him. And it was more challenging. So he had to use a microphone that allowed him to increase the volume of his voice and to become more clear to the audience he was speaking to. Virtually, I think more about headsets in this situation, and your earbuds. When you're delivering or speaking virtually, you want to make sure that whatever headset that you're using allows you to be picked up clearly. The words you're saying come through with great clarity so that the audience can pay attention to what your content is. That'll be extremely critical in virtual settings. I know many times you do want to use headsets. If you have no headset plugged in, that can lead to some echoing noises, and sometimes you can't be picked up if you're not close enough to your laptop or your computer. So those are some considerations you want to take into account when delivering a speech virtually. Then you'll also want to become familiar with, again, when in person, you want to be familiar with the room conditions. We encourage you to fill out what the room conditions are. The immediate surroundings affect not only the speaker, but also the audience. So when the speaker knows where the presentation will take place, you should be able to find out a variety of things, such as if the room is going to be heated sufficiently or air conditioned. Have you ever been in a room where somebody's delivering a speech and it's freezing cold? That makes me want to fall asleep. That makes me want to like bundle up and really fall asleep because I like to fall asleep in the cold, and that can distract a little bit from the audience. So you have to be aware of that and maybe see if there's anything you can do to remediate those room conditions. You also want to make sure that there's appropriate lighting. This is very important for also virtual settings. In virtual, you want to make sure that your space is lit up enough to be able to be seen, especially if any props or any tools that you want to leverage. If it's really dark, really dim in your background, it's going to be hard for the audience to follow. So for me, one tip that I have is there's almost an LED light right behind my computer screen. And I was struggling with lighting for some time. I had lamps on both sides of my desk, but for some reason, it was still very dark in here. But once I got this LED light, now people can see me clearly. And, it doesn't blind me. I thought I wasn't going to be able to see because this light is shining right in my face all the time, but it's really not that bad. You also want to look for the discrete entry. So if you're speaking close to the room's entrance, you want to make sure that there are late corners in the room available so that if somebody walks into the room, it doesn't distract the audience from your speech. And then you also want to make sure that there's not any competitive noise from outside. Again, this is also very relevant for virtual presentations. If you're presenting, you want to make sure the noise around you cannot be picked up through your speakers or through your microphones, because that can also become distracting. You want to make sure that your voice and what you're presenting is the only thing that is coming through at that time. And then, finally, although, some situations may be beyond a speaker's control, you should be aware of any potential difficulty and be ready with a contingency plan or equip. And this is especially important when determining what visual aids are going to work best for your presentation. So presenters should visit the speaking site in advance or the platform in advance and determine how the visual aids can be accommodated. If you intend to use visual aids, you want to make sure that you consider and ensure that the visual aids are located where all can see. That's less of a challenge when you're delivering virtually, but you do want to make sure everybody can see your presentation. If you're using a PowerPoint presentation, you definitely want to make sure that the screen sharing works and that everybody can, again, follow along with your presentation. And if you're in person, you want to make sure you have the tools and techniques and capabilities at that meeting site to be able to present that presentation in PowerPoint virtually. If you're doing any handouts, you also want to make sure how those are going to be distributed. And again, this is if you're in person, but you want to make sure you leave those at a desk where everybody can access them. And if it's virtually, you may want to provide that information as a link through the chat while you're giving your speech. But do it before you give your speech so that you don't have to fumble around with it. You can do it before or after, but you don't want to fumble around with it during your actual speech. So moving forward, again, you always want to rehearse the speech. Ultimately, practice is the best way to prepare for a presentation. Although relentless practice tends to be a bit frustrating, right? Because you don't want to hear yourself. You don't want to go to the point of undermining your presentation, but it's critical. So you can use a few proven rehearsal methods that will encourage an excellent performance when delivering your speech. This includes practicing ideas and not words. You want to be familiar with your ideas that you wish to share and focus on communicating those ideas instead of a memorized copy. And then you want to make sure that any special statistics or quotations are delivered accurately so you can leverage some note cards during your presentation for those. You also want to prepare a mental draft of that speech. Preparing this draft can help avoid the frustration of faulty verbal delivery. So if you start to stumble over your words like I just did, it can sometimes throw you off if you've internalized your speech. But if you mentally draft that speech in your head, it allows you to adapt and move forward a little bit easier. And then you want to finish each rehearsal session. So if you do falter while rehearsing, don't stop and start again. You should indicate the trouble spot with a check or some notation, but continue on, resume, because you can return to that delivery area, that problem delivery area, after you finish the entire speech and begin to focus on how to improve that. You could also improve your speech through what you learn while rehearsing. So some tips to keep in mind are to add improvements gradually. So concentrate on improving one specific area. So if you're working on your pacing, you may want to practice or rehearse with that in mind. Once you get your pacing down, then you can start to practice on your body language. And so as you take a step-by-step approach, it allows you to master one thing at a time. And then you also want to arrange for feedback. Friends or family members are also great, but Udly is a great tool that you can leverage. And also just practicing by recording yourself. Being able to really look at yourself and self evaluate can really help you hone in and improve your speech. And so, coming to the end, some additional considerations and steps that you'll want to pursue in order to ensure a successful presentation include providing material for an introduction. The more you get your introduction and conclusion down, the more efficient you can be if you start to stumble and remember your speech. You also want to make sure that you physically prepare yourself. So some tips for that are to eat and drink moderately before the presentation. Of course, you don't want to drink any alcoholic beverages because you'll be slurring your words probably, but you also don't want to drink a lot of caffeine. If you become over caffeinated, you'll get a lot of energy and it may cause you to speed through your speech as opposed to taking your time and really working through it patiently. And then again, you want to have a mental rehearsal. You want to be as prepared as possible. And the more you can mentally prepare for what's about to occur, the more you can be adaptable to any changes that will occur during the speech as well. And so to conclude, I would like us to think about this anonymous quote, which states, good luck happens when preparedness meets opportunity. I really like that quote. And so when rehearsing a speech assignment, it's easy to become focused on what to say and what other areas are going to be neglected. So you want to, during your research and organization stages, you want to emphasize that you need to think about the presentation's delivery, which is also critical. Careful preparation and well-devised practice strategies can assist you in achieving speaking excellence. And so tools such as Udly, as well as leveraging your peers in the NIST Toastmasters Club, can help you tremendously along the way as well. So please leverage us as much as possible. We're all here to help each other achieve our goals, and practice and preparation is one technique and along the way of becoming a seasoned and veteran public speaker. So thank you, fellow Toastmasters and guests. I knew I was going to run over time, but I'm glad I was able to get through that. So thank you all.
Nico, you did a great job at tying in your talk with the previous presentation. You were right. It was just absolutely perfect to present on your topic as well as have the UD, whatever, that other tool available. So that was really a nice tie-in, and I like the way you brought that in. I thought your slides were very on topic, and you used many really, really good personal examples that I felt sort of not only made see myself struggling to prepare for presentations, but also allowed me to understand from your perspective what are the things that you tend to look out for. So I think you really provided a good introduction to the whole concept of how to give good presentations, how to prepare for and practice for good presentations. I also like the idea that though the slides were mainly focused on an in-person presentation, which for some people can be more scary than a virtual presentation, I did like the way you pulled in the virtual information as well. I thought that was really effective, and nowadays we are so more apt to give presentations online as opposed to in person, though that, of course, changes with time as always. So I like the way that that was factored in. So all in all, I was going to say that your speech was very appropriate. It was very appropriate for me. I'm preparing to make 2 very large public speaking presentations soon. And I now know that I can still panic, but you've given me some useful tools to prepare for that. So I thank you on that aspect as well. For as a fellow colleague at NIST, this is very timely. A couple of little comments that I have that are germane to this specific speech that you had given today. I'm sure if you were to give it another day, it might not have the same issues that it has now. But one of them was that, especially towards the end, you started to speak very quickly. I was missing the leisurely conversational pace that you had earlier on. Also, it's hard because you have just a very soothing, relaxed, and calm voice, but you might want to consider doing just a little bit more vocal variety to accentuate certain aspects of what you had to say, because I think that would add more interest to what you said in your talk, into certain key parts of your talk. One of the phrases that you said a lot is that you would say, you want to make sure. You want to make sure. And that happened frequently during the talk. And once again, if you just added a little bit more vocal variety, changed a little bit of the words there. There were, I would say, very few use of filler or repetitive words, but towards the end that crept in a bit. Overall, though, I really appreciated the speech, and it was so refreshing to have you provide it. Thank you.